It's an expression of God's glory and, in a
Mm.
certain sense, a glimpse of heaven on earth. Yet this beauty must be understood, so that it may draw people more deeply into the mystery being celebrated.
Yeah.
The question in my mind is, how many times do we as leaders, as people that come to church on a
Yeah.
frequent basis, step back and
Yeah.
ask ourselves, do I even know what the heck is going on?
Yeah.
Do I really understand the liturgy? Welcome to Magnified Ministry Podcast, the podcast dedicated to inspiring, encouraging, and equipping parish leaders to build thriving missionary communities in today's rapidly changing world. This is the Magnified Ministry Podcast. Welcome back to our second part of this series where we are unpacking and having conversation around the church that Gen Zs want to be a part of building and effectively carrying.
Which is kind of fun because we are having this conversation in the Easter season and in spring, and I always find it kind of fitting that as we are thinking about like design of the podcast and what it would be a fitting conversation after Easter, that we are talking about this kind of a resurrection story, right, if you will, with this new generation and
Yeah.
the story of new life that really, if you had told me 5 years ago that's what we would see, I would absolutely not believe it, right?
What's fascinating about it is I think that there were some signals that Gen Z was a different generation than millennials and Gen X and boomers. I remember when COVID happened, and then there were a lot of different things in the news, and um, there were a lot of young people starting to take up causes, right? And they were starting to, uh, I was like fight back, but almost push back all the digitalization and everything that was happening that we kind of just went
One
with,
with.
because I think they've grown up in a world that is hyper digital, hyper connected, and I think we as a society have become victims of our own technological progress,
Mm-hmm.
right? We have allowed um, internet, phones, devices to permeate everything that we
Sure.
do, and in some ways, maybe they've made us dumber, like some of the movies talk about, but they've definitely made us less connected, less rooted, less grounded, and almost very callous because we expect things to be fast and we expect things to be just the way we like them because the algorithms will only show you the things that make you feel good about yourself, right?
Well, it's an interesting thing because I had this reflection maybe a year ago or so. I said to my aunt, like, I don't know if there's a problem with me, but it seems like the movies are getting dumber and dumber. And then of course, the algorithm listened to it somehow, and then I got this article that I was reading, and it was actually about the fact that the movies are
Yeah,
actually made
simpler.
simpler
They
because
are.
everybody's on their phone, and
Yeah.
if people don't find easily what's going on, then they get frustrated and the reviews are bad. So to keep good reviews, you actually make dumber movies. I mean, that's a huge
we
kind of
we live in a very fake, we live almost in that like alternate reality without it being putting us
it's
goggles in
crazy,
being,
yeah.
right? Because nothing really feels real anymore. And I know that sounds crazy to
But
say, but it's true.
but I think you are naming something that's directly connected to this episode and this series, right? Is that in the world where you can create something in about 10 seconds on AI,
Yeah.
picture, image,
Yeah.
video, you name
Anything.
it, people finally are awaking to the bigger questions. Is there an objective truth?
Yes.
Are things here that are lasting,
Yes.
that I don't have to reinvent or invent myself? And there's a great comfort in knowing that the Catholic Church for 2,000 years has been proclaiming the same truth we believe Jesus proclaimed and established the church, so we could echo the same words, reading them in the culture context that we live in.
That's
And
right.
there's something really powerful about it, right?
And I think that is one of the things we talked about in the last podcast, and we've been talking about as well, is that what is drawing young people to the exploration of faith and spirituality is, yes, this backdrop that they find themselves in, where they just have no idea what's true. They're more depressed, feel more lonely, and I think that leads to
Yeah,
openness because they're looking for goodness, truth
sure.
everywhere and
Yeah,
anywhere, and they do not have the same roadblocks to church
yeah.
and religion that we would have, and prior generations would have. And so there's this great openness and opportunity. And what's fascinating is that they're being drawn, I would say, by the entire spectrum of Catholic treasures, if I'll say that, or Christian treasures, right? Because they're drawn by the mystery, right? They're drawn by sacraments. You were talking about it last week, the confessions and the desire for adoration and the processions, like things that were very
Mm-hmm.
cultural back in the day,
Yeah.
are images and symbols and
Yeah.
tangible things that are drawing people in, while at the same time, some of the more mystical elements are actually also drawing in young
Yeah.
people, right? The intercessory prayer, being prayed with, some of the stuff around the Holy Spirit, the learnings of saints that kind of traversed all of this world. And I think that's what's I'm observing is it's not that it's one way or one particular spirituality. It's
Mm.
almost like they're seeing this whole thing play out and they're like, whoa, this is all real. This is all physical, but also supernatural at the same
Yeah.
time. And they're trying to unpack that mystery and figure out like how do I make sense of this,
Yeah.
right? Because it's so different than anything I've ever
Uh-huh.
experienced, right?
And a mystery is so attractive,
Mm-hmm.
especially the transcendence of God,
Yeah,
right? The fact that, going back to what Tom Holland would say, right, is embracing the weird. Not, I think that's where the church kind of lost the opportunity, right? And again, 70s and 80s and 90s when it kind of took the mystery away and everything just became this kind of a um, touchy-feely explanation, right? It's like did Jesus feed really 5,000 people with uh, five loaves of bread and two fish? Well, it just make into great sharing. People just got so inspired by Jesus, they started sharing. And so it wasn't really that Jesus did it, it was just great sharing, right? So I think there was this kind of a theological movement that watered down the supernatural of Jesus. And it's like,
yeah.
no, Jesus is actually God. I don't care if they shared or not.
We
Who
weren't there.
cares?
Doesn't
I
matter.
wasn't there, but I actually believe
Yeah.
Jesus is fully capable of feeding 5,000 people with
I-
five loaves of bread.
If he
That's
wrote,
who I believe Jesus to be, and
if
I
he,
think that's what attracts people,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Is this if he cannot do impossible possible, if he cannot walk through the locked door on Easter morning,
that's right.
then what? Then he's not God, right? And
Yeah,
and so so Jesus does things that blow your mind, but that's what God does in our
he's
own
supposed to.
personal lives. We have those conversations all the time, right, with people who said, "I would never ever believe you if you told me last year I would not only come through the threshold of the church door, but I would be baptized Christian, and now I would be a leader in your church." I would never believe that about myself. So we don't have to look far. We look at our own community and we say, of course, Jesus is capable to do incredible things in people's lives. But this is what takes us to today's episode. They're attracted to all those things. Young people are not disinterested in God, in Jesus, and in the church, but they have a source of allergy around the structures. And so if you have to be very careful
Yeah,
about leaning into the mystery, leaning into rituals, leaning into the beauty of the transcendence, and making sure that you, as a church leader, prepare to answer and unpack that so that becomes a mystery they live out
right.
versus religiosity they will abandon.
Yes, I think that's very well said. And I think what we have seen is our generation and prior generations started to turn away from institutions, right? Whether it be churches, governments, whatever, right? Like
Yeah,
there's a low trust in institutions in the current environment for a bunch of different reasons. And Gen Z's
not surprisingly.
no, I mean,
I look
we,
at the world.
you look at the world, you look at all the things that the church has people in the church have missed and mistakes we've made, right? Like I think all of that adds up to pain
Yeah,
and that is
confusion.
real. And I think the next generation
Mm-hmm.
looks at that and says, you're just like every other institution,
Yeah.
right? And it's funny because like they want to they want to explore God, and the church is meant to be a vehicle by which people can explore and
Mm-hmm.
know God and know God's love. But sometimes the institution of the church, the people of the church, end up being that barrier that actually keeps people from diving in deeper.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what we want to talk about is what's our role,
Yeah.
right, in all of this, right? If we all believe the numbers and the trends and the things that we're telling you about, which is that the younger generation is being attracted, being called, if you will, to rediscover the Christian faith and the Roman Catholic tradition. What do we need to do,
Yeah.
right? Do we just teach them and preach at them? Do we pat them on the back? Do we let them go on their own? Like, what is it that you have seen be really helpful, and what it is that this next generation needs from us, ministers,
Yeah.
leaders, people in the church?
I think there's three things that come to mind always.
Always three.
Being a good consultant, come back to three things. A trinity. One is social media. Use social media as a way of explaining, right? Don't use them just as a way of proclamation, but also use them as a way of explanation of what the proclamation is about, right? So simple stuff. Ash Wednesday, let's say it's coming in your church. Palm Sunday, it's coming. The big holidays that people might be thrown
Mm-hmm.
into, or the season when fall is coming and people might be in new neighborhood who are new. Use that as social media as a way of explaining what is happening. So just record a simple video and say, "Hey, we invite you to church to receive ashes." Those are three reasons for which we do it that are biblically based. And those are the three outcomes that we hope the ashes will remind you of. Very simple. Use social media as a mean of explanation, unpacking the mystery, helping people to really more fully participate in it. Second is what we do here after alpha courses. We invite people to our beta courses, the next step after alpha. And beta are courses, discipleship courses. And what the disciples do with Jesus, right after he called um, Andrew and Peter, James and John, and the whole rest of them, what did they do? They spent time with Jesus, understanding what the kingdom of God is about, what's the nature of God is about, what Jesus is about, right? They spent time with Jesus, listening to his stories. So for us, beta are different aspects of Catholic faith and Christian teaching we unpack together, and we say, okay, this is what the saints are about. This is what the sacraments are about. So we use the methodology of Jesus and we unpack it, so people then can lean in into saying, oh, that's why we do those things. That's why the church has saints. This is the role, right? So it helps to clarify what is it that we teach and why is it that we teach. It's just it leans into great intellectual uh, tradition of the church, but also
Mm-hmm.
connects it with living experience and with small groups, so people can
Mm-hmm.
respond with their own hearts. Right? That's really important. That it's not just proclamation; it's also conversation, a community
Yeah.
that you try to develop.
And I think the other one you're saying, it's not just explanation, it's experience, right? And I
That's
think
right.
I think it's both and. Everything you're talking about is both and, right? Because I think that's an important piece to underscore, which is we we are in a moment in time
Yeah.
where our response and our approach has to be both and,
Yeah.
right? Eucharistic adoration and prayer meetings, uh, Bible and alpha, right? Like it's and because this is what people are a lot at is they want the whole picture,
Mm-hmm.
right? They don't want to be go one this way, one the other. Is It's all of it, right? So those are two. What's the third one?
And the third one is, especially for priests,
Yeah.
deacons who are presiding at different services and preaching, is to really take your time in explaining what is happening. Why is it that we do it,
Mm,
right? So, not presume that the people who get there actually know it, because I guarantee you, if they're young, and they were formed in a households when the parents didn't practice faith, even if they went to Catholic schools. We hear it all the time here at St. Clement. They just don't know what they don't know. And so empower them with information, right? So prior to our starting Mass, we kind of explain it briefly. I do it at different moments of the Mass. We do it before the Eucharistic adoration. We do it when we explain the confession. We just don't tell people, for example, using the example, like, join us on Tuesday night for reconciliation service. They don't know what they are talking about. I mean, in concept they do, but versus starting by saying, one of the deepest human needs we have is a need to be forgiven and a need to be loved. And the church captured that through the ministry of Jesus in a sacramental way, through the sacrament of reconciliation. When we can come and say, God, I'm not God. I made mistakes. I chose to sin. And yet I believe that you are this goodness that will wash away my sins,
Mm.
restore me to grace, and empower me on the mission to follow you. Now, that is a very different way of talking about reconciliation service than saying,
Hmm.
join us on Tuesday
On
at
Tuesday
7
nights at
p.m.
7 for
for
confession.
reconciliation
There'll be 7 priests
service.
here.
Yeah, that's just a meaningless thing to
Yeah.
Gen Zs, right?
Well, and the other, you talked about the homily, right? And the preaching and part also like explaining piece of mass. I think that's really important to unpack a little bit, right? Because there was something Pope Benedict talked about in Sacramentum Caritas, where we wrote that the beauty of the liturgy is part of the mystery, an expression of God's glory, and in a certain sense, a glimpse of heaven on earth.
Mm.
Yet, this beauty must be understood so that it may draw people more deeply into the mystery being celebrated.
Isn't it beautiful?
It is
Can you
beautiful.
read it again? That's just so powerful.
I
Like
wish it was in Latin,
Pope
I,
Benedict was such a great writer. Wow.
phenomenal. But I'm gonna bring this because
Yeah,
this is
read it
important to
again.
talk about. The beauty of the liturgy is part of this mystery. It's an expression of God's glory and, in a
Mm.
certain sense, a glimpse of heaven on earth. Yet this beauty must be understood, so that it may draw people more deeply into the mystery being celebrated.
Yeah.
The question in my mind is, how many times do we as leaders, as people that come to church on a
Yeah.
frequent basis, step back and
Yeah.
ask ourselves, do I even know what the heck is going on?
Yeah.
Do I really understand the liturgy?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we were talking about this a couple of weeks ago when you were sharing. I think this was a conversation that you had with Jack, right? About why does a priest hold up the gospel and walk around the altar? How many people in the church know why that is?
Mm-hmm.
I actually have a hypothesis. I actually don't know. I've been waiting for you to tell me so I don't sound stupid.
Yeah.
But there's so many symbols, so many movements, so many things in the liturgy that I have learned because you've taken the time to stop and unpack and explain. But there's so much and so
Mm-hmm.
rich that if you don't really understand the depths and where pieces come from and what's happening, it could be really easy to just look at it and it may just feel like a choreographed piece of great theater,
Yeah.
right? For people that are not really getting it. But once you start understanding it, the mass comes alive in a new way, and you're able to, I think, move. Statistics point to the fact that a lot of people come to church and mass and they come to get something out of it, right? That they're coming to feel peace or feel closer to God or feel quiet, whatever that may be. But that's not the purpose of mass. The purpose of mass is to worship God. If we get peace, great, secondary, but it's to come worship.
Yeah.
But I think it's because we don't understand. Like we just go through the motions.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
we can be very, as Catholics, very good at going through the motions,
Yeah.
right? And so I think this is a challenge for all of us,
Mm-hmm.
right? What Pope Benedict is pointing to is
Absolutely.
it must be understood. We cannot give that for granted, especially with the next
Yeah.
generation.
I'll
Right?
give you a good example as we are wrapping up this episode, but something that I noticed and I thought to myself, boy, this is a perfect example of why unpacking, um, why is it that we do what we do is so important. So,
Sure.
and when I was growing up back in Poland, I would go to daily mass with my grandmother in the summer, and those women, mainly my grandmother's age, they would always pray a rosary during the mass. Part of it is because, of course, the masses before Second Vatican were in Latin. They couldn't understand Latin, so they just prayed rosary, and the priest was doing his own thing, and then they were doing their own thing, and then there were bells, and the bells was the sign that something was happening. There was a consecration, so they will kneel, they honored the Lord present, and then there were bells to stand up. They would stand up, and they would start praying rosary again. And so we have here, I think, two or three people still doing that rosary. And what I noticed is there were like two or three young adults that observed that, and then they started doing the same thing. And so after Mass, I said, well, tell me a little bit about this. And they said, oh, it seems like so cool that you can come and you can pray rosary um, and be surrounded by this community of people praying. And I said, well, how do you do it? Like, why would you pray rosary if you can worship a living God present to you? Like, it's like being on the phone and texting your friends when you are in presence of somebody you really love. Like, do you think that
With it
person
right in
over
front of
time
you.
will kind of be discouraged? And they're like, yeah. And I said, well, that's what you are doing. Like
Mhm.
rosary, I love rosary. I pray the rosary every day, but I'm never doing near the mass. You are having encounter with living God who is present to you, and
Yeah.
you are saying, oh, I'll just pray the rosary. I'll do my own thing now,
Yeah.
but thank you for being present to me, right? So, but again, they don't
Yeah.
know what they
They
don't
don't know what they
know,
don't know.
and they're drawn to the mystery, so they like the idea of it. But you have to again help them to unpack it and say, no, no, that's not what we do it.
Right.
That's where it came from, and we will honor it. But we came to grow that that's not the best way to worship.
Correct. And I think that like it's things like that, right? It's helping people understand, right? The beauty of our faith, I think, lies in the repository of truth and fullness of mysteries that have been revealed to
Yeah.
us, right? And sometimes it feels like there is so much stuff,
Yeah.
right? Writings of saints,
Yeah.
writings of popes, many different, wonderful devotions and things like that. And I think we as Catholics can get into trouble, right? Like picking on one thing and it becomes popular religiosity or whatever. Um, because we don't really understand it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that's we are creatures of those systems that got us to where we are
Yeah.
today. And I think we have an opportunity with this next generation to take the time to not correct, but to teach.
Yeah.
Not to make them feel bad or stupid, but to help them to see that there is a place for everything, and there is a right order, and there are reasons why we follow certain things and rhythms
And
and
the discovery is beautiful, right? Because that's where God reveals himself when you
exactly.
enter into this creative dialogue with God through the church.
Exactly. And so I think that's the call for all of us,
Yeah.
right? Is you as a leader, your role is not just to sit back and watch your
And pontificate.
and pontificate, even though sometimes that's a lot of fun, especially for people that have a podcast. Uh, it's for you to roll up your sleeves and get in the
Yeah.
trenches with people, right? And hear their stories, hear their journeys,
Yeah.
and walk with them. Truly accompaniment in the way Pope Francis talked about it.
Well, thanks, friends, for joining us for this episode of Magnified Ministries. We'll continue next week, and we'll just continue to unpack the ways in which we as a church can accompany next generation in not just coming to church, not that just becoming the church, but really leading the church, right? This ability and willingness, generosity on the side of us church leaders to recognize they have something we don't have, and that they might not be fully formed, fully converted, as none of us are, but we want to empower them to really be the church, not just watch the church. So then they can bring their friends, they can share the good news, and then they can continue to carry the torch
Yeah.
of Catholic faith.
We'll see you next week.
Take care.